I wanted to know a few things about the new Airfix Liberator, so I asked the man who designed it. See what Chris Parker-Joy has to say about his creation right here on Gary's Stuff. Hi, I'm Gary. Welcome to the channel. Welcome back if you've been here before. So today I'm interviewing Chris Parker-Joy, designer at Airfix, who was responsible for the new B-24 Liberator in 1/72nd scale, and I filmed this interview at the Airfix headquarters in Margate. If you like the show, please do remember, give it the old imperial thumbs up on the like button below because every like counts. And if you haven't done so yet, please do subscribe to the channel, hit that bell and you'll be notified of all my future content as it becomes available. So let's make a start and see what Chris has to say. First, I asked him what were his first thoughts on being told that he was going to be designing the B-24. There's this lovely bomber kit. You turn up in your office one day, you come into work, not knowing what the day's going to bring, or you're working on some projects. Dale, I presume, just says, Chris, can you come in here in the office for a second, mate? I've got a quick chat. And they say, right, we're making a B-24 Liberator. In fact, to be more precise, you're making the B-24 Liberator. What goes through your mind when you get that command, as it were?
It's always fun to be thinking about something new. Like we spend so long working on each project that it's something fresh. You're like, I can let go of the last thing and start getting my head into something new. But for this particular project, B-24, the first thing was really thinking back to doing the B-17. That it felt like such a similar sort of aircraft. When I'm trying to imagine what the project's going to be like, this time I could go back to something that was pretty similar, and remember what sort of challenges I had with that, what bits I really enjoyed with that, and trying to think through that older project. And yeah, quite nice to kind of come back to something similar, but obviously move the design of it had moved on, it had improved, and kind of getting to do its an advanced version of the B-17 in some ways. And some of the things that I particularly enjoyed with that, I knew I'd get to enjoy with this, which is like working on all the little different areas on the inside of the aircraft, on these large bombers that have kind of compartments, separate compartments for your navigator, your radio operator, your bomber, the waist gunners. And each of those areas is like designing a little room with its own equipment and character, and and getting to imagine, I guess, what it might have been like to move around this aircraft with the rest of your crewmates bumping into each other, and what tiny little spaces there are. But it kind of has more character in that kind of sense than maybe a single seat fighter does, where you've only got one little area. Here you've got a community of people working together, and that's kind of just makes it feel different to work on.
I know this because I'm in the middle of making it. It's incredibly detailed on the inside. There's a lot of detail, which kind of at first you think, when am I going to be able to put the two halves of this fuselage together? And they've done that as well. So it's like a two-edged sword in a way. There's not many windows unless you open up the rear gun, the waist gun position, for example. So how much of that do you think, well, is there a time you think, look, no one's ever going to see that. I'm not going to, I've got other things that are more pressing to model. I need to nail down this turret, for example, rather than this bit. No one's going to see it. I can leave that. And is there any way of looking at the CAD and thinking, I'll be able to see that, I need to do that, or someone will need to do it? Or do you say just, do you know what, someone thought there, they deserve to have this modelled as well? How do you decide how much of the interior you cover in detail? Because it is covering it in detail.
I always want to do more. That's a bit of the challenge. There's like an area above above the bomb bay, which I did leave because you really are never going to see that from any angle. But because of photos of it, I really wanted to I can see some detail there. Should I add it? Or no, there's literally no way you're going to see that at all. It probably adds, definitely, and we all do, I think, add more detail than is really necessary. Partly, it's it brings the thing to life on the inside as you're building it up. You get to kind of know how much details is in there. We probably could be more sensible in only adding detail and areas that have line of sight through little windows and stuff. But
But then you're going to have people saying you didn't do enough detail in this.
Exactly, yeah. You're torn between the two. It's a shame how little you end up seeing, and it is always a bit frustrating that I like adding stuff on the inside because of the character that it brings to it, and getting to through the process of building, as I have in the process of designing, getting an idea of the workings of the aircraft and what each section was doing, and that, like, I enjoy learning that from the design process, and I think you learn some of that through the build process as well. And so getting to kind of fill those areas with detail, even if you don't see them at the end, I hope provides some level of interest as you're building it, kind of like, but that's what's going on in that area. And as you say, it kind of, for the people who served in those roles in that particular, maybe it's an area like the radio operator who might not be particularly visible, may not have any windows, but to still be able to provide, like, do the desk and those sorts of things, feels important to represent the whole aircraft properly.
You mentioned you designed the B-17 kit, which I know a lot of people are building now because of Masters of the Air. There's a lot of group builds going on, and which is fantastic. It's a lovely kit to make. Don't forget to look at my video, by the way, of building it. But that was about 8 years ago it came out. So is there anything sort of radically different in the design process or in the prototyping or production that's really massively changed in the time that you think, I wish I could go back to the B-17 and redo it with this technique now, or anything like that?
Yeah, it's interesting. I can't believe it's been 8 years since that came out. That is,
well, it's because you must be enjoying your job.
Time has flown by. Yeah, like, oh man, I've got a bit older. Yeah, it's a good question. I do sometimes feel that with other projects. Like, I wish I could redo that. And it's often more of a case of I would maybe design something differently on the second time round than necessarily like the technology's developed it, do it again. When I think back to like redoing something, it's that way around. I think maybe with this particular scale model, we're obviously not like covering the outside with rivets and stuff, because it would just look over scaled. And so I'm not sure that the engineering, the kind of tool making improvements would necessarily change the design that much. There were some quite big differences in the research between the B-17 and this. So the main difference is that the B-17, we didn't have a 3D scan of that, whereas we did have a 3D scan of this. But on the flip side, for the B-17, we managed to get hold of pretty much all of the original engineering drawings. We had them about 20,000 microfilm drawings from the Smithsonian, which took a long time to go through. But that was a real joy in a sort of tedious way. Just like getting to see all of this, and the skill that went into creating all these drawings was amazing to kind of get to flick through. There aren't many that are useful for a small scale model, because loads of them are like tiny brackets and bolts and stuff like that.
Got to be a cup holder in there somewhere. Got to be a cup holder.
Exactly. But getting to design it from that was a really interesting process. And a process that I really enjoyed. And we didn't really have anywhere near the same number of drawings from this. Partly, I think we didn't get hold of them because we had the scan. So they weren't as necessary, really, and the scan was more available and quicker and whatever. But the scan isn't necessarily better. It's just different. And it maybe represents that one version. So yeah, I think perhaps how we researched, like a combination of both, could be nicer. We had more photos of this than we had of the B-17, able to get inside this where we weren't able to get inside the B-17. So the research bit was really quite different. I think I probably used quite a lot of the similar design ideas in my head, I guess, maybe even subconsciously, with things that worked and didn't work. But that's probably the main difference.
The big difference between the two, obviously, is this has got a nose wheel.
Yeah.
And B-17's got a tail wheel.
It's so much better with the tail wheel.
The nose wheel, that must be, especially on this aircraft where the main wheels are so far forward.
They're ridiculous.
Yours here are both sitting on their nose, but I noticed both have got the ladders down.
A little ladder.
That must be quite an issue when any nose wheel aircraft. You've got to think, well, we're going to have to say this weight, and we've got to have the space for some weight to go in.
Yeah,
But on
that's
this, it
tricky.
must be a lot more difficult because there's almost no room as
No,
well.
there's so little. I've tried to make the spaces for it without compromising the look. I think probably a modeler will have to add some more weight outside of the areas that we've specifically designated, but would be compromising. You might be able to see it.
Yeah.
You might not. It only if you're really looking through the turret, you can probably.
Yeah, I did
In.
fill the ammo boxes for the
Yeah.
nose turret because they sit against the walls. I filled those up with liquid gravity as well,
There's a lot,
and I'm hoping it's all going to work.
It is crazy how far forwards, as you say, the main wheels are, and then this is so heavy. If you don't put the tailplane on, it's about right. But
okay, yeah, slightly affects its
really
performance.
Yeah, not exactly a good option. So that's why we had to put this ladder in at the back to give an option to show it without you having to stick it down to the board or something.
Yeah.
We did look at some other ways of other supports at the back, but it's so heavy. I think your best option is probably sticking it down if you don't want that rear ladder, and that's a bit of a shame. Maybe you'll be able to find ways to squeeze more weight in, but that was tricky for sure.
Another thing I noticed when I was going through the parts, I was having a look through the box, is that the tail turret here, a lot of it is actually moulded in clear, including the guns. What was the thinking behind that?
Yeah, these turrets were entertaining to work on. They certainly occupied my mind for quite a chunk of the project. There's just so much going on in each of these little turrets. They become quite interesting little assemblies and problems to try and resolve of how do I get all of these layers in, because there's like the outer kind of glass, and then there's like some inner windows and walls and the guns and the like little controls and the seats and all those sorts of things you're trying to squeeze in, and the wall thickness is compromised, so you haven't got so much space to work with really. And so we're trying lots of different ways to break these parts up. The thing that I ended up on was attaching because of this little window that's on the inside, that was kind of a bit too small and the wall thicknesses weren't great to split it up. So then that whole kind of inner wall became clear so that the window could be clear. But then I could have had the guns separate and had some location into that, but then I needed some location for the inner part as well.
Okay.
And so what ended up happening is the location for that inner control unit kind of sticks into the wall, and then the gun becomes like actually where that locates into. It's easier when you're seeing the parts. Now, there could have been other ways to do it. I tried a bunch of different things, and this is the one that felt most efficient, I think, without you having to fiddle around with loads of tiny parts. I know it means you've got to be quite careful with the guns because the clear is slightly more brittle.
Yeah.
But that's kind of why I ended up there as a process of elimination of other options.
Right. Yeah. Well, fair enough.
There may have been another way, but I haven't had them snap on me while I'm assembling.
That's all right.
Only once I've been sitting on my desk for a while, knocking things around, and another one's gone. Hopefully, you'll take more care of yours.
Yes, I will. I will. Well, at least while I'm building it, anyway. So, apart from the weight and this turret, were there any things that kept you up at night, thinking, "Oh my goodness, how am I going to get over this?" That really actually worried you about the design? That you think, I actually don't, off the top of my head, know how this is going to go yet.
Yeah,
that took time to figure out.
Well, those two things are definitely the biggest drains on my mental capacity. The turrets and the nose weight. I guess on top of that, there's some little challenges like the how to represent the kind of corrugated Bombay doors that roll.
Oh, right.
We printed out some parts with different ways to try and represent that, because the outside surface of those is kind of just a sheet metal. It's a single piece bit of metal, but it folds and flexes as the Bombay doors curve round. And so how to show that well? They started off with panel lines, thinking that rivets might might not work in this scale, but panel lines didn't work. So ended up with these little rivets. But it's something which you're like, I don't know. I think it's as good as we could probably get, but it's a hard thing to represent really nicely. It's a sort of weird surface like that. There's not many times you're representing metal that's designed to flex and like a shutter.
Yeah.
So that was a funny one to work on. What else kept me up? I don't know. There's a bit of a quite thin material at the bottom part of the fuselage where running along, that kind of makes up the walkway bit of the bomb bay. And I was always a bit nervous that was a bit like, was that going to fill properly? Because it's getting a little bit spindly. But if I'd got it much thicker, the whole thing would be overbuilt and wouldn't quite work. So that worried me a little bit, but it came out okay.
And was there anything that you looked at and you just think, do you know what, I've nailed that. I've actually got that exactly how I wanted it, and it's exactly what I want to see, and people are going to love it, even if they don't recognise it straight away. You think, I know that I've really got that right.
I don't know. I think any probably any modeler as well and designer, like, you can always critique yourself, right? There's always something you're like,
absolutely.
Oh, it's never quite as good as I'd hoped. Just because you're always like wanting more, hoping you can do more. But one area that I particularly enjoyed building after designing it, and just something that I like, was actually the nose assembly. That little section, I think got a nice level of detail for the scale, and how the parts all fit together, and then how the nose slots onto the fuselage. I find quite satisfying, and I think that kind of worked as well as I had hoped it to. It's actually something that we got an in-house 3D printer, one that was sort of good enough for like printing out bits as you go along with the design, like iterative designs. And it was the first project that I was doing where we got that, and so I got to print out that nose section quite early on and be like, does this work? Is it too fiddly? Does it slot on well? All those sorts of things, and got to like make some little adjustments to the design a bit more than I might do on previous ones. Didn't have the same kind of instant ability to get some bits in your hand.
Right. That must make quite a difference. Yeah. That you're not having to wait for a test shot to come from somewhere.
Well, we'd normally always get a printed prototype done, but we still use an external supplier for the main one, because their printers are better quality than the one we've got.
Right.
Like, it's wild how expensive those ones are.
Yes.
But that's quite an expensive thing to do. Even as a prototype, it's quite expensive, and it takes a few weeks to get the bits back. Whereas here, I could send it to the printer and get it the next day. It's so much quicker and so much easier to do some quick design changes. And so that worked out quite well. And I really enjoyed working on that and building up.
That's quite a key part of the kit, because obviously that's where the next releases of it that you're not going to tell us about come into it, because one of the big differences between marks of Liberators is the nose. The layout of the turrets, or whether it's glazed for the RAF runs and so on and so forth. I know you're not going to tell us what the second or third or fourth releases of this kit are going to be, but do you design those? Is that part of the process when you're making a Liberator kit? Presumably they don't say, oh, but by the way, make sure you can swap those over, because eventually we're going to have new ones. Or they say, right, well, we're going to release the 24H first, but then we're going to release a D and then maybe a coastal commander. Do you then do all the design work for those at the same time, and then the whole project is done, and then when the release is coming up, then you just change the sprues in the box?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. Yeah, we when we're choosing subjects, future releases is absolutely a key part of what helps. So obviously the big expensive bit in any of these kits is the tooling. It's a huge sum of money, and so the more that you can get out of the core bit of tooling, the better. And so we'll look at future options, and so we've got most of the bits for this. If we do a few other bits, we could do another version, and that for pretty much every kit we're looking at that as much as possible. And actually, so it is a lot easier to do it all at the same time. So the design process I will do all the bits for all the versions in that initial chunk.
All the potential versions.
And then try our best to remember what we did 3 years later.
Where the file is on the system.
Yeah, exactly. What did we do that bit? That can be a bit of a challenge, because it can be years later that you get round to bringing something else out, but you have already done the bits.
Sure.
Because it's cheaper. It kind of makes more sense if you can get them into fewer but bigger tools, rather than having like loads of individual molds for the future bits. That wouldn't be very cost effective. So yes, if a future version were to come out, then the parts would have already been designed.
Excellent. That's good to know. That's good to know. Well, thank you so much for sparing some time this afternoon. I know you're very busy on all sorts of other projects you're not allowed to tell us about, and you wouldn't anyway, I'm sure. But thank you very much for filling in for this wonderful background materials. It's a lovely kit so far. Hope you guys have been buying them. Hope you're making them. It's an absolute stunner. It really is. Thanks, Chris, very much for your time. Cheers. There we go then. Bit of an insight into how you go about designing a new kit like this. There's quite a lot to it, quite a lot of complex things in it, and interesting to see some of the design decisions and compromises you have to make when putting a kit like this together. Now, while I was at Airfix, I did ask a few people about this thing. I've heard a lot of stuff on YouTube and seen it on Facebook and socials of various kinds about how the wheels are off center on the Liberator. The holes for the axles are off center on the main wheels, and I looked at my kit and I can't see a difference, and apparently the difference is 0.15 of a millimeter. It's a production issue that didn't get corrected, or was too complex to correct. Whatever the actual reason was, it wasn't designed that way. It's produced that way in the molding, and 0.15 of a millimeter off. Now, when I do reviews of kits and I look at the decals and I zoom right in on the decals, you remember my standard measure is my propelling pencil lead, which is 0.5 of a millimeter. So the error is 1/3 the width of that propelling pencil lead. Now, my eyes aren't what they used to be. I cannot see that as a difference. I physically look at it, I cannot see that degree of accuracy. Now, if you can and it bothers you, then okay, that's an issue. Take it up with Airfix, I'm sure, or just buy some aftermarket ones. But do you know what? I would say the overwhelming majority of people, you make that kit, you put it on a shelf, you are never going to look at that and go, oh my goodness, those wheels are off. I just don't think you will. I've no idea why this has got such currency, this thing. But anyway, maybe you've got different ideas. Why not let me know in the information box below, or comment box below there. Let me know what you think about that sort of level of accuracy. I know the guys at Airfix would rather it were absolutely spot on, but 0.15 of a millimeter, 6/1000ths of an inch, really? I don't know. Anyway, huge thanks to Chris at Airfix for letting me have a chat and to record it, and of course, huge thanks to Airfix for letting me use their facilities there to do the filming. If you have enjoyed the show, and I hope you have, please do remember, give the old Imperial thumbs up on the like button below, because every like counts. And if you haven't done so yet, please do subscribe to the channel. Make sure you hit that bell and you'll be notified of all my future content as it is created. Thanks very much for joining me today. Hope to see you again on our channel very soon. Take good care now, and goodbye.